people might still be on their way, but I would very much like to welcome everybody who is here to our first Relational Matters Archive conversation with Vivienne Bozalek. It's a great pleasure for me to see you all here, and from close by and from far away. And I'm excited for what's to come in this new conversation format that we want to kick off today. My name is Katrin Thiele. I'm the initiator of this project, and I'm otherwise teaching and researching in the graduate gender program at Utrecht University. Here with us is also Ida Hillerup Hansen, a PhD researcher at Utrecht University and such a helpful co-organizer of this Relational Matters archive so far. Ida will oversee here the technical details in our sessions together online, and also will moderate the sessions chat, which can be used by all live participants who are listening in today. Ida, do you want to say a few words about these technical things before we continue?
Yes, I do. Welcome, everyone. Relational Matters Archive will run a series of conversations throughout the spring and the summer of 2022. The conversations are recorded, and they will be available in the online archive on the Relational Matters webpage, where you can also go and learn more about the project. Each conversation is loosely structured around 3 questions, and it will last up until 45 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A. We encourage all of you who are attending to share your questions in the chat, and then I will raise as many as time allows us after Viv and Katrin's exchange. Also, if these options are available to you, we ask you to kindly not switch on your audio and video during the event, but like I said, just choose the chat or conversation option. Yeah, that's it. I will give the floor to Viv and Katrin.
Yeah, let me start our conversations with a few words first about this online event, and then the work it hopes to do, and then also introduce to you our first conversation partner here. The Relational Matters Archive aims to collect insights and divergent practices dealing with relationality as a starting point for research inquiries and ways of living. The archive is part of a project in which 2 claims are interwoven in the attempt to engage with and attune ourselves to today's planetary condition. On the one hand, it is about an engagement with relational matters, which express an insistence on the intra-active and messily entangled condition of our times. And on the other hand, the statement is very important that relation matters, meant as an ethico-political wager to become more literate and more carefully attuned to what entanglement as living condition implies. That is, what does such a claim ask from us when living it? It's important to me to also emphasize that to take a relational departure point does not propose relationality as a solution in itself. Instead, our conversational encounters around relational matters want to inquire what relationality means in specific context and on different scales, and how maybe a relational approach could offer significant insights to what is happening around, amongst, and within us. This much for the introductory word about the archive. The Relational Matters Archive webpage can always be visited for more. I would now like to take the opportunity to introduce to you our first special guest, Vivienne Bozalek. Vivienne Bozalek is an emerita professor in Women's and Gender Studies at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa, and also an honorary professor in the Center for Higher Education Research, Teaching and Learning at Rhodes University. She was previously a senior professor and director of teaching and learning at the University of the Western Cape. There's a long-standing relation between her and Utrecht, actually. She holds a PhD from Utrecht University, and the 2 of us together work for some years now in joint PhD supervisions in the context of an alliance between Utrecht University and the University of Western Cape. Vivienne's research interests and publications include the political ethics of care, in social justice, posthumanism and feminist new materialisms, innovative pedagogical practices in higher education, and she's very much interested and has lots of expertise in post-qualitative and participatory methodologies. There are many book titles and published works I could now name, but related exactly to these just mentioned research focus. But everybody, I think, can find them online, and I would rather take the time here still to say also why I wanted to have my first conversation here with Viv. And there are at least two reasons for this. On the one hand, I wanted her to be the kickoff of this series because in these last 2 long pandemic-stricken years, Viv's and my collaboration on diverse relational matters and on how to do academia differently were very significant to me. So Viv comes to me as nearly the most natural conversation partner in this project. We never lost touch, although living on 2 different continents. And maybe the last 2 years were our closest in terms of theoretical and practical collaborations up to here. And on the other hand, I wanted to start off the series with Vivienne Bozalek because the chosen format here of this conversation online has a lot to thank to one of Viv's own co-produced projects. It's a webinar series that's ongoing still, in which she, together with Candice Kubi and others, provides also online sessions that are organized in a thematic frame and in which also questions are guiding in order to allow for more resonances then also later by listening in among the different invited speakers. So these are something that was very inspiring to me. And so we could talk about this much longer, of course, but given that our format distinguishes itself mainly also in the sense that we try to do this archive in a shorter and more compressed version, a more compact version, maybe for further use, we hope, in teaching and research, or as a continuous tool to look and listen in. I will now stop here with my introductory words and just want to thank you, Viv, for being here with us and opening this series. I want to straight away, I mean, this is an online environment and it's always a bit awkward to start something. If we would be in real life, we would just do this corporeally more smooth. But let's just, I think, jump straight ahead into the first question that we want to discuss with you today. And that question, I want to read it out to you, is how does relationality actually figure in your work? How would you say you are engaged with relationality, or from which angle are you engaging in what this format here calls relational matters? It would be great if you could start off this discussion around these themes.
Thanks very much, Catherine, also for the introduction and for participating in our series. So I thought, now I can't refuse you because you couldn't refuse me. And but it was a bit daunting, I must say, when you said I was going to be the first in the series. I think it's always a little daunting to be the first. So I'm going to try and think about the first question, and I thought about it a little, and for me, I suppose one's disciplinary background is quite important in thinking about something like relational matters. And I chose social work as a discipline at university. One of the reasons was that it focused more on relationships and the social, whereas psychology was really specifically about individuals and, you know, intrapsychic matters. But I mean, be that as it may, social work in South Africa and in other parts of the world was, I think, quite a conservative profession. And I studied it at a time in 1976, which was a very explosive year in South Africa. There was the Soweto uprisings, where young students were protesting having to use Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in the classroom. So social work was really, you know, promoting itself as an apolitical profession. And, you know, some of us in the class felt very uncomfortable with that. So for me, you know, things like the anti-psychiatry movement at the time were interesting ways of thinking about relationality, although now looking back, I don't entirely sort of agree with them. But I sort of got involved with David Cooper's work and Ronald Lang's ideas, but never Deleuze and Guattari, because they were sort of totally incomprehensible to me. Although I see a friend of mine did give me Anti-Oedipus, and it's sort of from the 1980s or the 1970s. But yeah, so social work was critiqued by Nancy Fraser, I think, who did use something like the juridical, administrative, therapeutic sort of machine. She used a sort of Foucauldian lens to critique social work, and I think it was really quite brilliant at the time. Just in terms of other disciplines, you know, when I was involved at UWC, we started Women's and Gender Studies in 1995. And I think that through my involvement with teaching on those programs, one certainly became aware intellectually that of the danger of essentializing and of inherent characteristics. But I say intellectually because I think it's only latterly, and it's really through the work of Karen Berard, that I have more ontologically and ethically understood that, you know, a relational ontology is not really so easy to live with or to do. It's not just an intellectual pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was also through the political ethics of care that, you know, I became aware of a relational ontology, although it was very human-centered. And some, you know, it's a huge field, the ethics of care, and there've been, you know, a wide range of people writing in that field. And some have focused on a sort of dualistic relationship between mother and child, for example, or, you know, just between two people. But I think the work of Joan Tronto has gone beyond that. And can you hear me? Because I
Yes.
see I've got bad network quality.
But I hear you very thank you.
Okay, good. So, you know, the ethics of care did alert me to relational sensibilities, things like attentiveness, like taking action on seeing a need, caregiving, allowing the person or the whoever or whatever one is interacting with to respond. And also the notion of trust, which I think you know very well, Catherine, and you've written about. So that, and it was a sort of, you know, an alternative to sort of human rights approaches and to principle ethics. So it was a more dialogical way of engaging. And I think the ethics of care, you know, led me into having an interest in relational matters. Yes, and then I moved into the field of higher education studies. And I think that relationally, you know, looking at these sort of disciplinary sort of boundaries is also important, because for me, it doesn't really matter which discipline I've been in, I've maintained the same interests. So I think, you know, the relational ontology sort of supersedes disciplines, really. And as I said, you know, the work of Karen Berard, and particularly the notion of interaction, is something which is very, very difficult to get one's head around, to really understand that there are no pre-existing entities, that everything comes into being through relationship. And also, I suppose, it's not only space, but it's time, that one can be in, different times and different spaces in the thick now. So that's also, has been very influential for me in sort of trying to reimagine the world, and has been important in my work. And I think these sorts of sensibilities do lead one to work in different sorts of ways. As our project on doing academia differently has tried to sort of open possibilities for.
So thank you so much, because I think you already specified a lot of things that we might come back in some way a little bit more closely with maybe the next question that you already started. I think now I don't want to interrupt, but I think when you exactly referred to the projects that you do for a long year to reconfigure higher education, or to really are very much in what I can see very much an academic that tries to enable transgenerational mentorship and collaborations to open up ways in those more and more neoliberalized universities, also on your end. Maybe we can speak a little bit more about what you think, what shifts, and maybe really also what methodological shifts you see taking place when you're starting from what you're saying as a relational, when you see research also as a relational endeavor, and maybe really in your case also really going a little bit deeper into how interaction or entanglement in the Baradian sense, and in your work also very much, I know, as a haunted entanglement and not as a simple entanglement, how that, what methodological shifts would you say does it provide for what you want to engage with, both I think as a practitioner in higher education pedagogies at this moment, I think most clearly, but also as of course as a writer or as somebody who produces knowledge about this.
So when I was in this position of being the director of teaching and learning, one of the theories that people were using was cultural historical activity theory. And I mean, that's, Vygotsky, which is assuming that one cannot have access to the world, that one needs some sort of mediation to have access to the world. So I think that, understanding a relational ontology, well, a particular kind of relational ontology, which I would call a post-human or a feminist new materialist one, because I think Vygotsky is also a relational ontology, a different kind of one, allowed me to work in different ways when engaging with academics, because a lot of the work we had to do was to engage academics about their scholarship, about their teaching and learning. And it can just be sort of a technicist approach, or, you sort of looking at exit level outcomes, etc., etc. But we tried it was Candace Kubi and myself and other people at other institutions who got together a course where we tried to interest academics in looking at other ways of coming to concepts, in using art. We tried some sort of swimming workshops, slow scholarship. So these were ways in which, we did these more formal courses. But in my own work, in my work with PhD students, what made sense to me was to do things with people rather than to prescribe or to say this is the correct way of going about this. So I think it's in co-learning and in you know, as I've written about in the Slow article, in being curious oneself and engaging others in one's own curiosity, you know, genuine curiosity, not sort of setting questions that you already know the answer to. But things like reading groups became really exciting academic spaces. You know, to engage with reading texts aloud, which is quite different from reading them oneself, and to ponder over a paragraph or even a sentence for 1.5 hours. It might sound a luxury, but I think that everyone does get a lot out of that process. So, you know, I think the whole race towards setting many readings and sort of superficially knowing things is something that I started balking against. And yeah, it's very difficult to get out of those processes. But I think in terms of perhaps things like PhD supervision or engaging in research projects, or just getting together with other people who are interested in, you know, in texts, you know, it's a generative way of doing things. But I'm not saying that it's going to be possible for, you know, people say, oh, well, you know, it's all very well for you, you can do that. But other people would need to sort of go more quickly and produce publications, etc., etc., in particular journals. Yeah.
But I think just to come to intervene quickly, what I find very interesting also in your description about slow scholarship, what is maybe for me important also to maybe hear a little bit more stuff from you, because yes, indeed, one can of course read the movement of slowing down or also slow scholarship, or indeed what you described now as different kind of practices, in the sense that some can have that context and others cannot. But I would like maybe to think of it a little bit more in the sense of that slow scholarship actually is not in order just to slow down, but to also really attend to the complexity of issues, so that indeed the research is no longer a research about, but a researching with, as you say. And so in that sense, you know, I would also, maybe you can still, you know, still say a few more words about what has shifted for you also, indeed, as a researcher, when you think about that relationality. If you have that presupposition that you're in a relation, rather than in a relation that is as a relation with, rather than a relation that is constituted by a researcher researching on something, or teachers teaching their students, how, you know, how that maybe is interlinked very much with the quest for slowing down in a different way, just than, okay, we do just more alternative kind of other projects, more art-based, or more, you know, like reading groups, etc. Maybe could a little bit more go in this, because I find it important that actually the relationality claim is about attending to more, rather than being forced to attend to just a very specific one-way thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would, and it's not only, you know, with other humans either. It's with the texts, and perhaps even, say, in online environments. It's the how, it's the process, you know, of how things are done. And, you know, I was thinking of also our swimming and writing, for example. So I think, you know, dwelling with or feeling that one is part of something is a different way of going about doing things. And I suppose you also spoke about hauntology. You know, acknowledging one's complicitness in things is important. So, for example, Dorothy, who was one of my PhD students, we now co-write things. We looked at how social work, well, we both have that sort of background, how it has been complicit in South Africa and, you know, beyond South Africa in the colonial project. So I think that it allows one not to step away because one is very much part of that. And what was interesting about the paper is that Dorothy used her field notes, and the reviewers said these authors have obviously never engaged in social work, or they've never removed a child from a family, and they don't know anything about what the magistrate would say. And they obviously don't know anything about children's homes because they're sort of critical of it. But all these notes were based on Dorothy's own experiences. So I think it's very important to look at, I mean, in the same way as Berard looks at the complicity of physics and quantum physics, you know, for the atom bomb, one has to look politically at, you know, one's trajectory, whether it's social work, women's and gender studies, and, you know, who was included and excluded, and the sort of feminisms, which I was conscious at, you know, I was, as you know, at a historically Black university, and I was teaching research methodology and feminist research methodology. And I think I had to keep apologizing and saying, you know, this is so trying to interest students in it, this, you know, despite their skepticism, in that it was offering sort of alternative ways of doing research or doing interviewing or whatever. So, yeah, I see that as very important, and perhaps something that one forgets, that one is always already implicated. And it is not the sort of intentional, sort of rational human that has to take responsibility. But, you know, we are, it's, as you say, it's our entanglements that we have to be accountable for.
Yeah. So if to just maybe summarize this, I think what I hear very much, and I find this very important to stress, that the way you present the methodological impact of a relational starting point, I would say, isn't exactly as I said before. I mean, one has to attend to many more relations and situatedness than assuming that one is just in a strict one-line engagement with what one is interested in or what one is confronted with. And in that sense, indeed, very important. And I always hear this from your contexts and also in your work, that the part of that we inherit, of course, and are implicated in specific, very difficult and very wrong situations. It's, I think, one you know, is one starting point why you actually turn to the question of relationality, in order to address also the implications, not in order to smooth them out in relational thinking, but actually to be able to somewhat address and also account for them. For the last question that we wanted to discuss, I would nonetheless like to maybe make you think a little bit about where you see dangers or tensions or limitations also in taking a relational starting point or taking relationality as a starting point for your research endeavors, but also for your ways of life. As you say, that a relational ontology that you are working with is not just an intellectual endeavor, it is also kind of a practicing. Where do you see changes in this, if you want to say, more and more attention to relational matters in very many different discussions, I would say?
Well, I was just thinking about, my PhD thesis was very much a critique of systems theory, and which you could see as a type of relational ontology, because it's not holding any individual accountable, but it's saying you must look at the system as a whole. And people in social work practiced systems theory, family therapy, which I found I couldn't relate to at all. We had to do it in the clinical master's degree that I did, and I felt very uncomfortable. And then sort of teaching a course on child and family care and social work, and having students feel that they are complicit in well, their parents were complicit in poverty and drug addiction, in imprisonment. It's locating everything in this family system. So my thesis was very much sort of troubling that. And, that's one of the dangers, I think, of a relational ontology, is to wash out power relations, and not to see the asymmetry of things. And I don't know whether flat ontology sort of talks to that or not, where it doesn't hierarchize anything. But I see that as a danger. Another danger I see is just an intellectual engagement with a relational ontology. Because I sort of don't feel that it goes far enough, or so things like indeterminacy are important to really understand if one is thinking about space and time, hauntology rather than ontology, in a relational ontology. So another danger, I think, is to make things totally inaccessible to people, because these are not, sometimes it's written in very abstruse language, and people find it off-putting and find it difficult to gain access to. But I think once one has grasped something like indeterminacy, that there isn't a here, there, or a now, then, but there's sort of no fact of the matter, it's sort of quite mind-blowing, and it will impact on how one does things, how one comprehends the world, and what one does in the world, and what is possible in terms of researching, in terms of teaching and learning. Things like outcomes-based products, assessment, all those sorts of things would completely need to be rethought, from this perspective. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes, you do. Maybe just, another question. Maybe you could once also for people here say once more how you would then, so to speak, affirm an hauntological approach, in a sense of what is it that hauntology is different for you from, say, just saying it's a relational ontology. Can I ask you just this question, so to really also understand what you're saying, that this is not just a matter of words, but it is a matter of really twisting something in how you understand, how you approach the world.
Yeah, well, I think it also pertains to the political, because as I was saying, one has, if one sees a relational ontology in an apolitical way, hauntology wouldn't matter. But I think, just in terms of, for example, the fraught history that we live with in South Africa.
Yeah.
I think that it's, you know, to do it without some acknowledgement and, so, you know, assuming some responsibility for what has happened in the past and how that continues to affect the present and how that will affect the future, would be to do it in an apolitical way. So that would be, and to understand, you know, that this is how this might constrain one, and what one could then do within those constraints, would be an important way to incorporate hauntology.
Yeah. And I also, of course, think that the same, I think, goes with other terminologies, that it's, you know, exactly, I see the same danger as to describing it, either, you know, thinking of relation and relationality as a flat ontology. I would say that it is too, that doesn't attend maybe exactly to the questions of asymmetrical positionalities, but also the other danger of, you know, that because it, in this framework that your work is now positioned in, and I, you know, we have many conversations about this also because of my work, when it comes to, you know, agential realism or Baradian approaches, that terminology such as intra-action or hauntology or indeterminacy, of course, it means that we have to first of all get our head around this and maybe slow read what you know, a queer feminist as Barat would has proposed. But then it is very much a question of translation also to me, what it actually could concretely would mean in how I use it. And that is very much, I think, important if we engage with relational matters, that it is not a matter of words, that we just use other words and are done with a problem, as it sometimes, you know, might be quickly read, that from interaction to intra-action or something. I think a lot has to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a whole different way of being in the world. Yeah, and I think that it's not easy, because we tend to fall into habitual and common sense ways of viewing the world. So it's not something that is ever going to come easily. I think one needs to constantly be thinking about that one is part of the world. I mean, it's quite, it's, to see the world as relational is a very difficult gesture, I think.
Yes, it is either, or we can say it's either a very attractive models of just saying that, but if you want to really live in it, becomes a very difficult understanding of, also, as you also say, as, you know, not in order to just describe also how everything is related, but what that also does to whatever we start with engaging with. So I very much agree. And these are of course, I think we do attend to some of the dangers or limitations that I, also in my research, always come up against, namely that how to, in teaching also, or in acting, in living, how to not stand still, but to know that this is a continual, never-ending practicing, and it will always surprise us also with a task to do other formats, for example, to come back to what you said before, other formats of other ways of researching, be it art-based, be it, you know, alternative.
And also things like, is time out?
Oh, continue.
Because I just wanted to mention neurotypicality.
Yeah.
Because I really do appreciate the way, and, you know, our new series is about conversations about neurotypicality in higher education, which is not, as Manning says, something which exists in people, but it is the limitations that are placed on how one can be and and do academia. So I think sort of being in touch with other sensibilities through studying neuroatypicality is also important for us, because it can give us other ideas, other ways of being in the world. For example, in our reading group yesterday, we were talking, we were reading Manning's new book on for pragmatics of the useless, and she was talking about deaf-blind people and the language that people are using through touch. And I just sort of think it opens up new ways of imagining how one could do academia differently, but other things differently too.
Thank you. I think we did a wonderful job to stay in the time frame that we wanted to have for these shorter insights. Of course, these are not matters that we can complete in a discussion like that. But I would like to now really ask Ida back for the next bit and motivate all participants maybe to type down a question or a comment that you want us to attend to in the next 10 minutes still that we have for this format. That would be wonderful. So Ida, can you tell us a bit what came in maybe?
Yes.
Do we still have to wait?
No, there's a question, and I can just reiterate that everyone is welcome to share any thoughts or questions in the chat or conversation function. But thank you both so much for all the thought and energy you put into this exchange. It's very exciting to listen to. But I will start by reading a question from Sven, who says, hi. For Tynan, for example, relationality involves becoming, which I agree to, particularly thinking of Deleuze's molecular multiplicities and or affective eco-criticism. I also lean on the notion of becoming in my own research. However, I'm not sure it entirely escapes essentialism. And then parenthesis, does it need to? For example, if we use Deleuzean concepts of becoming dog, becoming child, becoming woman, etc., we seem to assume there are sets of qualities that are essential to a dog, child, woman, and so on. How would you comment on this?
Sorry. Viv.
Yeah, that's a difficult question to respond to. I suppose that it does relate also to people like Fred Moten and Harney and their concept of black sociality. So I wouldn't really think that this is a form of essentializing, but I think it's a form of providing alternative ways of being rather than specifying. But, you know, sort of, I suppose those are what you would call minoritarian types of states that are being referred to. I must confess that I'm not an expert on Deleuze and Guattari, but I myself like the notion of becoming, and I see it as a similar thing to indeterminacy and to a rejection of what is given, but what could be the potential that could come from an event, for example. Yes. Don't know if that answers your question. And Catherine, please chip in, because I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think I like very much how you approach the question as also bringing it to indeterminacy. That is also how I read those becoming figures. And of course, Deleuze Guattari give it a specific shape, as you say, Sven. You know, dog, child, woman. These are not indeterminate, not determined in some way. But I would agree with your take on this, that maybe the most fruitful engagement with it is to read them not as identities or as entities, but really as more as indeed alternative ways, I mean, addresses to otherwise than the masculine, human-centered, rational, and of course it is what Deleuze and Guattari do not attend to very much here, the whiteness of thinking in this. And so to more like replace maybe the very concrete words like becoming child, becoming woman, becoming animal, and that is not very, that's quite general, becoming dog is better here. Indeed, as a, you know, as a trying to deconstruct, I would say, or to unwork the patriarchal, human-centered position, way of logocentric discourses. That is what I would do. And indeed, indeterminacy is there also something that they also, and that's interesting, maybe they also might want to suggest that we have to, and this is at least how I remember that chapter, that it is to also sense a sort of relational engagement with this becoming otherwise. You need to have a relational understanding. I think that is also what I would think connects very much to the question of relational matter here. Of course, Deleuze and Guattari's writing is, conflictual in that sense that some like it and some really just cannot do anything with it. But that would be also my response here. Ida, is there something more, or do we have, I think, time for one more question?
Yeah. Yes, there's also a question here from Eva. Afro-pessimism has put critical pressure on ontological certitude. How anti-Black racism relies on the double move of ontological platitude. For white Western subjects, through the extraction and fungibility of Blackness, I wonder if you could talk about what limits or deforms the relational as endlessly potentializing.
Do you want to go, Viv?
Well, you can also go, because I think this is also your area of expertise, which you've also written on. I know that you've used the work of Sylvia Wynter. So maybe you could chip in and I could add something if there's something to add.
Yeah, it's certainly a great question. And I really see also I see a certain hesitation for me now to not admit that I feel that relational ontologies, even when we see them as ontology, are more on the side on potentiality than on the side of disruption of the relational. That, in view of your question about indeed the coloniality of being, or the structure of anti-Blackness as foundational, might ask for, or is asking for, is very much intervening into relational matter discussions. So I would say that for myself, I approach relational matters or relationality first of all as I cannot, as I think Viv also spoke about it, I cannot see it differently, that whatever we want to do, I see relationality as that makes us, and that does not mean for me that it is a good thing per se. Oh, not per se. It's not a good thing. It's also not a bad thing. It is what it is, I would say, and to figure out in what sense this then could also be a means to transform indeed these ontological foundational claims of what you say about plentitude for white Western subjects through extraction, via keeping with the relational, but kind of using as more as an analytical analytical perspective to indeed dive into those very haunting, problematic, troubled relations globally and planetary. To do that in view of maybe transforming relationality into something that is less toxic or less violent or less that I have to say is just the way I cannot do without. So I cannot, I think, twist my head around so much that I would say the problematic relationalities that we are living requires the break of relationalities, but more like how to indeed become aware of these assumptions in relational ontologies to help transform them. That I would say is at least the way I engage with that topic, and that is indeed, for example, with also troubling indeed relationality, not as a good concept, not as something that we strive for, and still not letting go of that either. I think I try to keep both. That's my response.
Yeah, I agree that it's neither good nor bad. I'm quite interested in Amitav Ghosh's new book called The Nutmeg's Curse, where he looks at the Dutch East India Company's sort of role in colonialism, and what he says is that it using the earth, the peoples, the animals as resources to be exploited could only have happened with a mechanistic worldview. So I think that, a relational ontology which sees one as never separate from things is something that could be used to examine situations in more fruitful ways, actually. I find it more fruitful. And I do think, that it was colonial, it was, a relational ontology is not something that has come into being as we know today, but it's been around for years and years and probably been appropriated. And, I do see that this mechanistic view of the world is a problematic one. And it is something that allows the expropriation and the exploitation to happen.
Thank you. I mean, this format, of course, in which we are kind of in a webinar style, does not now allow in further interventions, Eva. But I think that discussion will be continued, I think. Or is there a response? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. And also from Sven, who says Sven really appreciates Viv's concern with neurotypicality. The paper was really interesting read. Just to add that in there. Yeah.
It was a decision, of course, to decide for this format in order to upload those pieces also later on to a YouTube channel. But I see the limitations also in terms of conversation to invite people in, maybe also to respond to our responses. But I think we should now really round off, because we really want to have those clips at some point really on the website, so that people don't have to endlessly spend time to listen to them. I think it was a wonderful first session with a lot of thought going on in specific directions, pedagogies, relational ontologies. I think this Relational Matters Archive tries to really collect all kinds of different insights from different positions in relational matters. I love the beginning. Thank you so much, Viv, for starting this off with us. For everybody else here to know, maybe please stay tuned with what's to come. We prepare, a series until the summer now. Every 3 to 4 weeks, we want to have these sessions to continue our conversations on relational matters. We will, as I said, make the video available on the website in about a week's time or so. We need to format this a little bit. Our website is relationalmattersarchive.nl. Please visit there to also read that we have already announced our second conversation. That will be on March 2, the same time, from 3 to 4 in Amsterdam timing. And it will be with Anna Poletti, who is a scholar of life writing at Utrecht University. So kind of close by colleague. Thanks everyone for your attention, for coming here and staying with us. Thank you very much, Viv, for giving us all the insights and being an open conversation partner. And
thanks for inviting me.